All the power and excitement of Nintendo right in the palm of your hand.
It's called a Game Boy, the personal game-playing system from Nintendo.
That better not be what I think it is. And I think it's a Game Boy. Is it a Game Boy?
This thing rules. The thing rules.
Oh, hey, what's up? I'm Brian Altano.
And I'm Max Scoville.
This is a show where we discuss something we love,
Unpack why we love it,
explain where it came from,
try to remember our first impressions of it,
share our weird stories about it,
maybe learn something new about it along the way.
but first and foremost, we're here to celebrate the fact that this thing rules.
Hey man, you ever play one of those Game Boys?
Man, I love the Game Boy.
Boy, I love the Game Man.
Boy, I love the Game Man. Yeah, Nintendo's first fully gendered system, I guess. So the Game Boy is an amazing little thing. It came out in 1989, and it was basically Nintendo's first dedicated handheld gaming device in that it had cartridges that you could swap around, right? Like before that, they had done portable gaming things in the past, like the Game & Watch, which some of them were dual screened, which led to the sort of invention of the DS and the 3DS as we know it. But those games all had like very simple LCD screens, right? Just think of like the old Tiger handheld electronic things, and they would only have like one game on them, right? Or like mode A, mode B. But it was, when you hit the reset button or you put in batteries for the first time or started it up, you would basically see everything the game had to offer. Whereas the Game Boy had like an actual startup screen, right? It had swappable cartridges. It had its own sort of dot matrix screen. Admittedly, not the prettiest. It was not backlit. It was pretty blurry. It was notoriously puke green. But it led to some of the sort of coolest and most innovative first-party and third-party software ever made for a handheld gaming system, ever, really. And like, what's interesting about the Game Boy is if you approach it from the perspective of like, this is Nintendo hot off of the success of the NES and the Famicom being like, how do we make a portable system that sort of replicates all of that? What was interesting about the time was that it was completely normal to get sequels to popular game franchises that would come to handheld systems and be totally unique and weird. And also get ports of popular console games that were also totally unique and weird or like very bare bones. So yeah, the Game Boy rules. Let's backtrack real quick. The Game Boy is basically a large beige block that has a little green screen on it. It launched in July of 1989 in America for $90, and it came with Tetris, which fucking just kicked ass out the gate, right? A link cable, 4 AA batteries, and headphones so you could hear the stereo sounds. And what's cool about the headphones, I just noticed this like looking at the packaging today, because I have this like recreation of the original box. And the original box is so cool because it's got these sort of like hologram robot hands of this guy holding this Game Boy that, it looks so much more lit up than it ever does when you're actually playing it.
It is so cool though. Like
yeah,
that
the box is
it's
amazing.
just that cyberspace. There's no cyber and there's no space there, but that's what cyberspace looked like in 1989.
And what's cool is the headphones, it's got left and right earbuds, have 2 colors, which is red and blue, which is what we saw with the Switch 2 Joy-Cons at launch. And I don't know if that's just like, these are normal primary colors, it's common. But to me, there's like, that's a little nod to that. So yeah, $90, and it came with a game, batteries, headphones, and a link cable so you could, play head-to-head Tetris with other people. That is fucking mind-blowing.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
That is,
no,
yeah.
So let's back this up for a second, because I think it's very easy to be like, wow, it's a revolutionary piece of gaming hardware. It's a revolutionary piece of hardware.
Yeah.
Like, computers were not portable when this thing came out, and I think that's something we all kind of lose track of. But the fact that Nintendo was basically first out the gate, this was before cell phones. Like the closest thing at this point was what, like a pocket calculator?
Yeah.
There were little Game & Watch things, little Tiger Electronics things. Those were, about as powerful as a calculator, or visually about as impressive. You hold it upside down and write boobies or whatever. But it was, it was those felt almost like a pop-up book or something compared to a Game Boy, which was a computer. And it had modular software in cartridge form, which is wild. And again, you look at what computers were doing at the time, and like, I feel like color computers were still fairly new. You know, not, I mean, they weren't new, but it was like it was pretty frequent. You would run across like a green and black screen DOS computer or a black and white IBM 2 or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it was still, things were not, technology was not quite so widespread. So for like a toy to come out that is a little portable computer that has the ability to play, dozens and dozens of games, that's pretty cool. That's again, amazing. Yeah.
I mean, it was just the entire concept of having like a portable NES blew my mind as a kid. And so I didn't get this until Christmas that year. And to me, like, I guess looking back on this, because I know it came out in July. I mean, like, release dates are a weird thing when you're a kid, right? Because, like, things just sort of appear on shelves. At least back in the 80s and 90s, you didn't really, like, for the most part, until it was, like, movies and stuff like that, you didn't really count down, like, the days until something came out.
I don't think, product, like, with the exception of, like, Mortal Monday for Mortal Kombat, I don't think the release dates for products were particularly publicized the way they are now.
No, which is weird because like I think that like you got stuff on birthdays and Christmas, right? So or Hanukkah or whatever. Like there were special events. Maybe like if you graduated school or something, or you did really great in your grades, which that was not me. You would get a present, and then you'd get a video game, or you'd get a video game system or something like that. So I don't think I knew that it was like this excruciating long, almost like 4 or 5 month wait between when this system came out and when I actually owned one myself, because I imagine there was a couple of kids at school that had them, and I don't even know like what, I don't know what games came out in the first few months outside of the original launch window. So this thing launched in July 1989. It launched with Tetris, which was the pack-in game. And what was unique about that was that I remember specifically being on airplanes as a kid, going to like Italy to, the motherland, to see my mom's family and stuff like that. And there were like adult businessmen with suits on, sitting in first class and business class, and they were playing Tetris on Game Boy. And I remember that just blew my mind because like, to me, video games were such a, like, at least in my house, like my dad was always just like, yeah, I'll get you a video game, but like, don't fuck up in school, or like, this is a waste of time. It's a distraction. You sit in front of the TV, twiddling your thumbs. Like, you're not actually doing anything, like, as if like, if I had been outside throwing a ball against the side of the house, that would be a better usage of my time. But so seeing like grown-ups playing Tetris, like dressed up, going on like fancy business trips and shit like that, I was like, holy fuck. Like that was my first time really understanding that like this stuff had the potential to break through to markets outside, or groups of people outside of just kids. And I was also kind of just like, whoa, that's cool. Like you can grow up and like go on business trips and play Game Boy and play Tetris.
The thing is, at the time I don't think video games had quite the same stigma.
Yeah,
there was obviously like there were arcades and there were consoles, and arcades initially were kind of more of a mature thing than I think like we grew up with the whole sort of family fun center Chuck E. Cheese angle, but prior to that it was like they were bordering on like they're somewhere between like casinos and dive bars basically.
I mean, you couldn't even really reach him until you were a certain height.
Exactly. I mean, it was pinball machines were places where people smoked cigarettes. It was like a thing that would be in a bar. Like it was and less of a this is just for children. And like the Game Boy, if you look at even just the namesake, it is a video game version of a Walkman. Mm-hmm. And the Walkman, again, was another incredible micro-technology marvel where it was like businessmen can listen to tapes on the airplane.
Anywhere they go, yeah.
Like the idea of having it portable personal entertainment was still a fairly novel concept. Like that was a fairly fresh thing to have. And the fact that Nintendo, a Hanafuda card company from the Meiji era swooping in, like, and again, I love that Nintendo has this family-friendly, little kid-oriented kind of persona these days, but they also made like love testers, they made like they made some like groovy shit for people
before
in bars.
They made like the NES Zapper, they had like a bunch of gun toys they made, and they were making gambling peripherals basically. So
and again, it's funny to see that stuff sort of age down, but like the fact that you'd see businessmen in first class playing a Game Boy because there was no preconceived notions about who played a Game Boy, and
I don't. Like, it's really hard to impress on people now just how little we had to do when we weren't doing anything somewhere. Like, if you had to wait for like a school bus, or you had to sit in a car for a road trip, or sit on a bench for an hour and wait to get picked up. There was really like you would just sit and stare at shit. Like we didn't. I don't want to sound like an old man about this, but like unless you brought like a book or a magazine with you, or like I would bring in like the manuals to my NES and Super NES games and just like pour over those on the school bus. Like we didn't have phones, we didn't have laptops. Like the idea of like having a screen that could play a bunch of different things on it was just unheard of. And so all of a sudden I had this thing in 1989. And so this was the only thing I asked for Christmas that year. Like the only my mom was like, "What do you want Santa to bring you?" And I was just like, "Game Boy." That's all I wanted. I just wanted Game Boy and Super Mario Land, right? Which funny story. So the Game Boy launched with 5 games: Tetris, Alleyway, Super Mario Land, Baseball, and Tennis. And Tetris was packed in. So 50% of the launch games were sports. And all 5 of those games feature Mario in some way, which is so bizarre. Like he snuck in. He's the fucking, not the ref. What do they call it? The judge of tennis. Who's the guy that sits in the middle?
The king.
The king of tennis, yeah. He's the king of tennis. He's like he's some of the players in baseball. He's obviously the star of Super Mario Land, which is weird enough on its own. And then he's inside the thing, the paddle in Alleyway, because canonically that's a spaceship that's being used to destroy enemy alien invaders or whatever it is, right? And in Tetris, if you get high enough scores, like he appears in certain things, right? On some kill screens or whatever. So Super Mario Land was weird enough because like that took everything we had known from the sort of traditional arcade and NES Mario games, and it shrunk it down. And the game's really unique. It's got like this incredible, very like kind of like fuzzy chiptune soundtrack that's super catchy. But the weird thing about it is his fireballs in the game don't act like fireballs. They act sort of like the ball in Alleyway, where it just sort of bounces forever and ever across things on the screen. And 2, when you jump on Koopas in that game, instead of them turning into turtle shells that go bouncing around, they fucking explode. Yeah. So all of the Koopas in that game detonate, and then you fight like there's like shmup levels in that game, which is basically side-scrolling shoot 'em up, right? There's a couple levels in that game where you get inside like a spaceship or like a submarine, and you just shoot seahorses and shit. Like
are you like in Egypt? There's like a sphinx or whatever.
There's a whole Egypt world where it has this like there's like these pharaohs and sphinxes that just hop around and try to kill you. It's really, really clever. So yeah, 1989. All I wanted was a Game Boy, Tetris, and Super Mario Land. Opened up all my presents. Didn't get one. I got like clothes and socks, a couple of action figures and stuff like that. And I didn't want to be like, Santa forgot. And I was kind of like puttering off into the other room to have breakfast, and, which is probably just like a pile of chocolate or whatever you eat on Christmas morning when you're a kid. And my mom was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "Oh, it's okay. It's Merry Christmas." And she was like, "Did you get everything you wanted?" And I was like, no. And she was like, "Did you look in your stocking?" And I look over, there's 3 stockings at the time, for me and my 2 younger brothers. And my stocking just looked like a fucking boa constrictor ate a cinder block. Like it's just like a tube and it's got this gigantic rectangle in it.
What could it possibly be,
Yeah,
Brian?
what could it possibly be? So I turn it upside down and I'm shaking it, and that fucking Game Boy box slides out. And I was just like the N64 kid, right? And we didn't have a video camera at the time, but that I was just jumping for joy, screaming, ecstatic. And then about a month later, I kept it in the, we didn't have a carrying case for it. I kept it in the front pouch of my backpack. Not a great place. And me and my brother were pretending to do like karate on each other at the bus stop. And I spun around and he kicked my backpack and cracked the screen. And I got on the school bus and I couldn't see half of what was happening in Mario Land. And I was just like so sad. And I brought it home. I showed it to my dad. He called Nintendo customer support. We mailed ours out, and like I swear like a week later they mailed us a new one. And I was like, wow, this company has amazing customer support. And like, yep, that was a very easy way to make like a lifelong fan. So what I do love about the Game Boy is that it got tons and tons of really cool games. And a lot of them were like unique sequels or spin-offs to the NES games that we loved. But it also got a bunch of weird ports, which is odd because it only has basically 2 face buttons, right? It's got a B and an A. and a start and select. And it overlapped with, so it came out in '89, and that was sort of like, in the middle of the NES's life and just a few years before the Super NES came out. So by the time the Super NES came out, like we were used to having, B, A, X, and Y buttons, plus the L and R trigger buttons. So when you wanted to play Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter or Killer Instinct on the Super Nintendo, like you had options, right? There was all these different buttons you could push, different combos you could pull off, And then those games got ported to Game Boy, and it was just like, oh, I got to play Mortal Kombat with 2 face buttons. I got to do a Hadouken in Street Fighter with like this little D-pad and like a B and an A button. But yeah, it got a Killer Instinct port, which was
the Killer Instinct port.
Yeah,
it is. Man, that game is so hard to look at. I love it.
I remember it being mind blowing at the time because that and Donkey Kong Land were both. Sort of touting how they were using that 3D rendering technology that Rare was doing at the time for Killer Instinct and Donkey Kong Country, which looked amazing on Super Nintendo, right? Because it was just like, we were used to seeing, like if you compare, the pixel art graphics in Street Fighter, which are clean as hell and look gorgeous, versus the sort of like the stuff that they did, the digitized capture shit that they did in like games like Pit Fighter and Mortal Kombat, where they just like took pictures of human people and then shrunk them down, and they just looked bizarre. And then they ported those games to Game Boy. On Super Nintendo, like the Donkey Kong Country and Killer Instinct had these like gorgeous sort of like, almost looked like 3D rendered, right? Like the way Donkey Kong animated and moved, we hadn't really never seen anything like that before in 16-bit graphics, especially not in 8-bit graphics.
I mean, they cheated 3D graphics. Like it was kind of a brilliant way to go about it.
Yeah, it was awesome. They had these like pre-rendered backgrounds and everything, and so they ported those games to Game Boy. And Killer Instinct lost a bunch of characters. And just the backgrounds look bizarre. Like
they actually lost all the characters. It was only Glacius. Everyone just had to play as Glacius. That's all you could do.
It's honestly not much more than that. And then Donkey Kong Land, which was the sort of the port of Donkey Kong Country, was a completely original game. Like it had all these unique levels. There's like city levels in that game that aren't in the original. There's weird flying pig bad guys. There's like Donkey Kong has like a fucking fedora hat, like in the box art. Like it's just bizarre. But I remember getting this game on a road trip, and we went to stay at this house in this town in New Jersey on the beach that was basically like an hour from us. And it was just hot, and I was a kid, and I was like, I don't want to be outside. I don't want to be on the beach. I'm just going to stay in this house. And I remember sitting in this house and just playing Donkey Kong Land, like infinitely. And it's, again, like, this was a hard system to see. It wasn't backlit. It was blurry. It didn't have any colors. But the idea of having like a portable version of Donkey Kong Country that had unique levels, or a portable version of Killer Instinct, or like, a bunch of sort of like half port, half remake, half remixed versions of Mega Man games, new Final Fantasy games. It got 3 Castlevania games. Like,
the coolest thing I think is the games that were specifically like unique sequels. Like, Mario Land's a good example. Link's Awakening obviously is a big one. But the fact that it was almost like, maybe this was a second class platform, and so people weren't paying quite as much attention to like the style guide, or maybe there just wasn't the style guide yet. But you look at like Link's Awakening is hella weird. There's just like and you can speak to this at great length. We could probably do a whole episode on that game, but like it's just got like a noticeably more surreal kind of, it feels more akin to Mario aesthetically than it does to Zelda in a lot of ways. It's got like a lot of just sort of, you're like, what am I looking at? Like you're collecting musical instruments. There's like, there's a gorilla who collects bananas or whatever, or like an alligator. Like it's just, there's talking animals. Surreal. Yeah. And there's like, bits of that here and there in the later Zelda stuff, and they go all over the place. But that one in particular, and you look at the sort of the games that have been out up until that point, you've got the original, and you've got Zelda 2, which is weird on its own. And then there's, Link to the Past, and there's sort of a kind of a clear semi-curved through line of like what you're supposed to expect from that. And then suddenly it's like, you got to wake up a magic whale, and there's a big egg on the island. You might be dead. No one knows.
Yeah, and it's equally inspired by Link to the Past and Twin Peaks, and it's got side-scrolling sequences where you like with Goombas and warp pipes. There's a Yoshi doll and a claw machine. There's Kirby enemies. It's all surreal and no pun intended, dreamlike. But the idea of having a full-fledged, unique, portable Zelda game at the time that had it had like an intro cutscene where Link gets lost at sea. Fucking blew my mind as a kid.
Yeah.
Like,
and then
my God.
Metroid 2.
Yeah, Metroid 2.
The fact that like the second installment in a trilogy was just relegated to Game Boy, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it definitely, I think, lost a lot of people, or like a lot of people might have like steered clear of it, being like, oh, it's just Metroid Junior or whatever. It's Metroid again.
Yeah. I mean that is a notoriously obtuse game. A lot of the weird edges got filed off and fixed for the remake that they put on 3DS. But the original Metroid, was difficult, had no map. Like Metroid, the whole thing of Metroidvanias now is like we think about Super Metroid, right? And how that had a map and you could 100% it and stuff like that. But the original Metroid, like you really didn't know where the fuck you were going unless you were drawing maps yourself or you're sitting there with a guide or Nintendo Power. And Metroid 2, same deal. And like what was so cool about Metroid 2 and the Ninja Turtle games as well, and Batman on Game Boy, was that the sprites were huge for the main characters and the screen was small. So like when you're playing as Raphael in TMNT, Follow the Foot Clan or whatever, like that character is filling up like half of the screen. And I remember just being a kid and being like, this is so awesome. Because if you think about like the first NES Ninja Turtles game, like it sucks and it's hard. it's people have nostalgia for it, but like it's not a great game. But then Mario Land 2, right? Same deal. Like that game came out and they were like, oh, this is gonna be more like Super Mario World. You can choose which levels you want to go to in which order. There's secret exits, there's secret worlds. Like that was the introduction of Wario. Like the first time you ever fight him, like you get to his fucking weird castle at the end and use all the coins to, open up his castle. And then he steps in and gets his own game for the sequel and then just gets his own series of spin-offs and then just becomes another iconic Nintendo character, which is like so cool. Like the Game Boy gave us the sequel to Metroid. It gave us, the first portable Zelda game. It gave us 2 unique Mario games. It gave us Wario as a character. It gave us a bunch of, like they put the Star Wars trilogy on there, like all 3 of those games, and they're all weird on their own.
Oh yeah, they're super. The first one feels like really rudimentary, and then I don't know. I'm trying to remember what Empire and Jedi are like.
Watch a Let's Play of the Jedi one because it's really interesting. Like there's a whole sequence where like Luke goes into Jabba's palace and fights all these like monsters and stuff like that, and like it's just really cute seeing that in like 8-bit black and white graphics. But one of my favorite games on the Game Boy is Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong 94 basically, and it's sort of like what I love about Donkey Kong 94 is it basically to me it's sort of like it shows exactly why the Game Boy is so special. So that game opens up, and keep in mind at the time we'd known about the Donkey Kong Country series and stuff like that, but the Donkey Kong arcade games were like, you knew what they were, right? Each one of them had like 4 levels, and one of them's the Pie Factory and the conveyor belts and all that shit. And then you get Donkey Kong 94 on Game Boy, and you immediately start playing. Like if someone handed you this game as a kid and you started playing it, you'd be like, wow, Mario's got some pretty cool moves. Like he doesn't die when he falls off of like a platform. He can, triple jump and backflip and handstand. But like the barrels start coming down and Donkey Kong takes Pauline and you're like, okay, cool. And so you beat the first 4 levels in the game, which are basically just a remake of the arcade game. And Donkey Kong falls and dies and you go, wow, that's great. $30 that I spent on that. And then he gets up and climbs up a ladder and it opens into 100 new levels that are completely unique to this game, that only exist in this game. This game never got remade, right? It got sort of semi-sequels with like the Mario and Donkey Kong games. But this is the first time that like, I have a coaster. I have a set of Game Boy coasters. This is the first time that like Donkey Kong got like this really full-fledged, unique handheld game. And he's not even this, playable in the game. Like you play as Mario. It's really like they call it Donkey Kong, but it's, It's got the same name as the original arcade game, but and you would think that it is when you're playing the first few levels.
I think that's
And then
why I steered clear of as a kid.
Yeah.
'Cause like at the time, it's like I could play Donkey Kong Country. Why would I play this? Like
they put it on if you have Nintendo Switch Online and you pay the whatever $30 a year it is to get that, the Game Boy app on there has that game, and I implore everyone listening to play this because it's so good. It holds up so well.
everyone's told me to play this. It's been on my to-do list for a while, but like I love the idea of any game that just hides what it's really all about.
Yeah.
You know, like I think, and again, that's a bold choice to just sort of do the old bait and switch. But like starting up that game as a kid, I'd be like, oh, it's Donkey Kong, no thank you. Like this is an old game for grandpas. This is for cranky Kongs. I'm a hip young DK.
Yeah, I understand why a lot of people kind of slept on it, because like you would just look at it and be like, A, it's either a port of the arcade game, or B, like it doesn't have as good graphics as Donkey Kong Country, but it's so special. It's, equal parts puzzle game, platformer. There's stuff to collect in every level. Like it's great. I want to talk about some of the peripherals and accessories that this system got, because they're fucking ridiculous. First of all, the Game Boy camera and printer.
Oh my god, dude, that is my
mind-blowing. Yeah,
that's the thing that I always wanted that I never got. Like that's my, like Judge Reinhold wants a wiener whistle in the Santa Claus. Like that's one of those things that's up there where it's like I never got this thing. I need a little. Like what even is the resolution on that thing? Like 56 by 56 or something?
It's like a postage stamp, and the printer like literally printed postage stamps basically.
Yeah, it was receipt paper, which is inspired. Like that's brilliant.
It was so clever. So the Game Boy camera was this little thing, and again, this is before like we all had cell phones that could take pictures and stuff like that.
The idea of a digital camera was still a very new thing at the time.
Yes.
Like they were, I think at the time, like Sony was just starting to launch their digital cameras. They had the Sony Mavica, which used floppy disks as film. Meanwhile, like the big thing was like Kodak Advantix, which just was regular film that would like crop into weird sizes and cost more. But like digital was still, as a thing that anyone actually engaged with, a ways off. And like you would maybe see like a webcam in an AOL commercial and you're like, what is that? Or like maybe your computer would come with one and it would take the grainiest pics possible. So for Nintendo to come out and be like, yeah, it's a portable digital camera with printer. Get out of here. Like that's again, this company is either their shit is either 10 years behind or 30 years ahead.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of just how it is. I mean, the fact that they were like, yeah, here's like, let's mess with motion controls in 1989 or whatever. Let's do the Virtual Boy in the mid 90s when
they're always just taking big weird swings, and a lot of those sort of ups and downs were Gunpei Yokoi, who created the D-pad, was one of the head designers on the Game Boy, also the Virtual Boy. Like if you look at the list of shit he made, it's like he is like the quintessential just sort of wacky toy maker, where half of the ideas are insane and half the ideas are great. Like he's like the dad on Rugrats, right? You're like, how the fuck did you come up with that? And so there's the Virtual Boy, which obviously we don't, Nintendo doesn't really talk about. But the Game Boy, so the Game Boy camera and printer came out in 1998, and in 1998 I went on a vacation with my family to Italy, and my mom's family lived on. They come from this area called Bari, Bari, which is on like the southern coast of Italy, and you have to like fly to Rome and then take like this shitty little puddle jumper to get to it. And so we took the big long plane from Newark Airport to Rome, which is like 6.5 hours, and then there was another smaller plane that we had to take. And so on the way back we went on that smaller plane and it dropped like really fast and really hard, and there was like a major cabin pressure dropped, and it made my lung collapse, which is just insane. So I got back to America and I was like, man, I have this like pain in the side of my chest. I don't know what that is. And I went in for an X-ray, and they said, did you go scuba diving or anything recently? And I was like, no. They're like, well, have you been anywhere that like there was like a pressure drop or something? So we don't know how this would have happened. And I was like, I was in an airplane and that was it maybe. And they were like, okay, cool. We have to put a tube in between your ribs and drain the fluid out of your left lung. And so I was in Valley Hospital in New Jersey for 7 days, and friends and family came to visit me and just hung out. And my girlfriend at the time was just like, was there all the time. And my mom and dad was like, "Can we bring your Game Boy?" And I was like, "Yeah, but there's something that just came out, and it would be really cool if I had it. It's called the Game Boy Camera and the Game Boy Printer, which is like the whole point of this thing is it's a portable gaming device you can use to take pictures anywhere. But what if you were, sedentary in a bed for 7 days?" And so it's just so stupid. So my mom comes in and she goes, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I feel so bad, but we got you the Game Boy printer and the Game Boy camera. So I put the Game Boy camera into my Game Boy. It's a cartridge with like a big circle eyeball on top of it that you could kind of twist and rotate a little bit to take different pictures. And I had a like a stock photo attractive nurse who was really, really sweet and felt really bad for me. And she was like, "Oh, what's that?" And I was like, "Oh, it's this cool camera I got for my Game Boy." And she goes, "Oh, take some pictures of me." And she did all these poses, right? Nothing like seductive, but just like, hey,
Seductive enough.
Seductive enough where I was, a 16-year-old kid with a tube stuck between my ribs. And I was like, whoa, this is awesome. And it's the first time I've ever gotten in trouble with a woman over something like this. My girlfriend at the time came in and I had fallen asleep because they gave me like pain meds. And she picked up my Game Boy and was playing it and went through the pictures on the camera roll on Game Boy camera and woke me up and was like, "Did you take pictures of the nurse? What the fuck is going on?" And she got like
so funny.
Super jealous with me. I hadn't printed any of them out or anything like that.
Yeah,
but
you didn't want to have any evidence.
I didn't want any evidence. Yeah, I just kept it. I kept it.
That was actually one of the big problems with the Game Boy cameras. You couldn't have any like password protected folders to put. Our friend Anthony Carboni, I think, bought one on eBay.
Right.
And it showed up, and the battery worked. Like it still had saves on it from whoever owned it before, and someone had taken pictures of dirty magazines with it. I think it might have been like Maxim or something. I don't know if it was like full on like, X-rated or anything, but it was still like clearly some, teenager 25 years ago was like, this will be the perfect way to hide my shame. And there's just the grainiest low res photos of just like, it might have been the Sears catalog. I don't know. But like, what a cool little device.
My ex-girlfriend would have found that in 4 seconds. That kid's lucky that they weren't dating. No, so there's an app. So there's a bunch of ways to play Game Boy games on your mobile device. If you have an Android, you've probably been doing that for 20 years, so it's no big deal. But on iOS, just a year ago, I think, they put out this app called Delta, which is awesome. But it doesn't really work with your camera and the Game Boy camera. But there's an app called Sameboy, SAMEBOY, where you can put the Game Boy camera ROM on there and use your iPhone camera like a Game Boy camera, and it's awesome. I also found out that they made a special gold version of this thing for Ocarina of Time that has a bunch of like Ocarina of and Zelda shit that you can print out.
Weird.
Like it's exclusive and it's like super expensive on
Yeah,
eBay.
I mean it had like little digital rubber stamps and stuff in there.
Yeah.
Weren't there games where you like make stuff on your face and then you have to pay like a shmup with your head or something?
Yeah. So there's basically like a shooting game, like an old sort of Space Invader style game that you can play on there, where it would put your face in there. There was also like a remake of that game Ball, which was on Game & Watch, where you're just basically juggling two balls in the air, but it would have like 4 different animations of yourself. So yeah, you would take pictures of yourself or friends or whatever. There was also like a music mini game in there where your face was DJing. Like, yeah, they were so clever, man. So that's actually not the most perverted thing that's anyone's ever done with the Game Boy, because there was also a giant peripheral for this thing called the Handy Boy by a company named STD. I'm not making this up. So the Handy Boy was this ridiculous, like you've probably seen it in memes. It's this attachment to your Game Boy that both magnified and lit up the screen and also had fold-out speakers and an attachable joystick if you wanted to do that too, and a strap. Like it looks like a transformer that just gave up in the middle of transforming. Like it's so ridiculous. There was also a thing from Namco called the Game Boy Pocket Sonar. So the Game Boy Pocket came out in 96.
I want to talk about the Game Boy Pocket. I love the Game Boy Pocket.
Game Boy Pocket's amazing. So think about this. Game Boy comes out in 89. Game Boy Pocket comes out in 96, which is, I believe, the same year as Pokemon, right? Mm-hmm. And those two things just become ubiquitous, right? The Tetris was the best-selling Game Boy game for the longest time, and then Pokemon comes out, and everyone's like, "Oh, I need 2 or more of these games. I need to collect them all." It becomes this like global.
Yeah, so you gotta catch them all.
Yeah, you have to
Collecting
catch
would be
them
easy.
all.
You just pick them up, but you gotta physically subdue them and then trap them in spheres.
You do, and it's like that. We still get annual Pokemon games to this day, which is just nuts. It's like, of all the things that came from the Game Boy, Pokemon is probably not even probably, definitely the biggest. That continues to be the biggest. So yeah, we got the Game Boy Pocket in '96 and the Game Boy Light in '98, which only came out in Japan, which finally fixed the backlight problem, so you didn't need STD's Handy Boy.
Game Boy Color was what, 2000? 99?
Yeah, I want to say
Something
it
like
was 99 maybe.
So I got the Game Boy Pocket was that was actually my first real gaming device, period.
Right.
Like my mom was always very anti-gaming growing up, which is why I'm like this. But yeah, like I was, I'd play stuff at friends' houses, and then I would like borrow, like my best friend had, Super Nintendo, he had a Nintendo Power subscription, and I would like steal his copies that he was done with and stuff. And then leading up to Pokemon, they had Pokemon Power, that was like a mini magazine they stuffed inside Nintendo Power.
Yeah.
And I was like, I loved the art. I was like, what are these animals? Who are these little monsters? What's their deal? And like,
pocket monsters.
Again, like Pokemon was right on the cusp of like anime becoming a thing. So for there to be like, oh, there's like anime characters and they catch these little anime animals. Like, what's their deal? It's from Japan. It's strange. It's mysterious. Like flashback, like, I don't know, a year. I was at summer camp in 1997, and there was a foreign exchange kid from Japan. And I just remember, like, I think it was between camp sessions where like a bunch of kids had gone home and like a bunch of other kids were going to show up. And it was kind of this weird, like, just sort of dead zone week or something, or a couple days where like it was like no one around. And so you would wind up hanging out with people you didn't usually kick it with. And I remember just seeing this kid like sitting on a picnic table in the middle of a field, and he was hunched over something. And I was like, what's this guy doing? And I go up there, and he's got a yellow Game Boy Pocket, which I don't know if I'd seen a Game Boy Pocket in person at that point. Again, they'd been out for like a year or whatever, but like I feel like everyone I knew who had a Game Boy had the not the Game Boy Color, but the color case Game Boys. The ones that kind of came out alongside Donkey Kong Land, that were like, they came out and they came out with clear, the green, blue, yellow, whatever, all that stuff. So it was like one of those
banana yellow, I think. They were so
gorgeous, so cool.
Mm-hmm.
But he's hunched over a yellow Game Boy Pocket, and I was like, wow, look at that little thing. And I look at his screen, and he's playing. And like I knew JRPGs at the time, like I played FF6 and dabbled in Mystic Quest or whatever, and like I was like, what? I knew the interface, but it was all in Japanese, and I was like, what is that? What is going on here? What is this game? Is this like Final Fantasy? And he's like, yeah, kind of. And he sort of tried to explain Pokemon to me, and my frame of reference, I think he called it Pocket Monsters, and I was like, I just immediately thought of like Monster in My Pocket. That like toy line that was like,
no, I did. I was the same, my brain went to the exact same place when I first heard about Pokemon.
And I was like, they certainly had an interesting glow up there. Strange things going on over there.
They're cute now. That's odd.
But yeah, I was just like, what is this like? And again, you can't tell what any of these things are, but it was just like this odd, like mysterious thing. And I was like, I've never. And again, like I have this feeling now where you come across, anything that's just unfamiliar in the age of the internet, stuff that you don't know what it is such a delight. Like something that is completely foreign or alien, and you're like, I have no frame of reference for this. It exists in a vacuum. That was a lot more common back then. We didn't have the internet. We didn't know how to Google things. But like, I was reading Nintendo Power. I knew like a video game when I saw one, but I was like, what is this? This is so strange. And then fast forward, and I was, stealing the little Pokemon Power inserts out of Nintendo Power, and I was like, Mom, I need a Game Boy. I'm gonna need one of these things because this fucking game's coming out, and let me tell you, there's 150, possibly 151 of these motherfuckers, and somebody's got to catch them. They're everywhere. We got to go.
Like, Mom, do you know how little I'm gonna bother you for months on end? Like, I will not ask you for shit. I will be so buried in this thing.
I will need some AAA batteries. I'm gonna need a lot of them.
Endless supply.
Yeah.
That was interesting about the Game Boy Pocket was that it used 2 AAA batteries instead of the 4 AA's from the original.
Yeah.
Which is, I think it had a shorter battery life, but still, it was like 10 hours.
So it's an odd little machine. It's kind of like a vestigial, like, kind of sidestep, because everyone, like, there's a classic Game Boy and there's the Game Boy Color. The Game Boy Pocket theoretically is not, it's just a Game Boy, right?
Yeah.
There's the whole sort of, what is it, EverDrive? There's like, you can get cartridges that you can put an SD card in and put ROMs on there and emulate games and, not have to pay for vintage things that have dead batteries inside them or whatever. for whatever reason, try to run one of those on a Game Boy Pocket because of however it handles battery life. It will just eat the battery. Like it'll just completely demolish it, which is annoying. Whereas it's not, apparently it's less of an issue if you do it on like a regular Game Boy or on a Game Boy Color.
Any of the other ones, yeah.
But in any case, like the Game Boy Pocket is sort of like it's like one of those half measure, upgrades that Nintendo does. It's almost like the Switch OLED in a sense, where like you have, I mean, I guess it was a smaller form factor, used less battery, had a better screen, bigger screen, clearer screen. And I had like I had a green one and a Pokemon Red, which gave it a very Christmas aesthetic. I think I got it for my birthday, and like that was my first like video game. And I know that this is also like this is a very generational thing where like a lot of kids like your age had a Game Boy and Tetris, Mario, Zelda, that kind of stuff. And then there's an entire second wave that got exposed to Pokemon. Like Pokemon was the killer app that made them like, oh, I need to have this thing with me at all times.
And they had smaller hands, so like the smaller Game Boy Pocket was perfect. The toyetic, fun candy colors that it came in. The timing was just like, it was ubiquitous, right? It could not have been. It could not have gone better. For them.
Could have been better if I'd got a Game Boy Color, because that came out about 20 minutes later, and then suddenly
it really did. Yeah. Which is so funny. Do you know about the Game Boy Pocket sonar? Okay, so this is one of my favorite peripherals. It is a giant blue cartridge made by Bandai that you plug into the top of your system, and you drop a huge line into water, and it's a sonar for fishing. So you can catch fish in real life using this thing. It'll basically sonar scan the sea or a lake, and it also had a fishing mini game inside of it. So you could play a mini game while you're trying to catch real fish in real life with your other hand, which is, I guess, holding a fishing rod. Really, really clever. But I think my single favorite Game Boy peripheral, if you want to even call it that, it's more of a Super Nintendo peripheral or accessory, is the Super Game Boy. Because the Super Game Boy is a big cartridge with a cartridge slot on it that can plug into the Super Nintendo, and you plug your Game Boy games into it. And for the first time in history, we could actually play our games on our Game Boy games on a TV. So I had been playing all of these games, Mario Land, Pokemon, Donkey Kong, Zelda, hunched over these tiny little screens. And for the first time ever, you could play them on a big TV. And also, a lot of them had like sort of these bespoke color borders, and would also let you program in different color swatches. So you could go into each game, and Nintendo Power at the time was just like, type in this 6-digit swatch code, and all the bushes in Zelda will be green. And then if you want to go to a dungeon, then you can switch over to like blues and purples and stuff like that. And it was so clever. But Donkey Kong 94 specifically had this arcade border that was 16-bit. And a bunch of games had these. And it was so gorgeous, man, to be able to like play these games on a big TV with I think it was 8 or 16 colors at the time for some of the games. And it was 4 for all of the ones that supported it but didn't have anything special. But, you could play Mario Land where you could be like, hey, the clouds are, the sky's blue all of a sudden. Mario's actually red for the first time. So this blew my mind. And I remember going to Toys R Us with my mom. To love that. She just put up with so much of my gaming bullshit. It's amazing. We went to Toys R Us. I saved up for weeks to get this thing. I want to say it was only like $50 at the time. But, that's a lot of money when you're a kid. And they had sold out of it, but they still had the display unit. And my mom very politely asked the person working behind, I don't know if you remember, but Toys R Us at the time, like you would get the paper slips of what a game was, right? And you'd bring it up to this counter where there was this guy, at least in New Jersey, was behind like bulletproof glass.
Yeah. No, I mean, going to Toys R Us to buy video games was like going to buy liquor at a grocery store in a bad neighborhood, where you have to go into like a whole separate sub store that has like its own little turnstiles.
There's a guy who occasionally gets robbed or shot at, and you're like, wait, are people really doing this for super ghouls and ghosts? Like you're getting pistol whipped over Bubsy. And so, she went up to the guy at the counter and was just like, hi, my son really wants this, but you only have the display unit. We're wondering if you could sell it to us. And he's like, well, it doesn't come with the box or the manual or instructions or anything like that. And I was like, I don't care. I just want to play my Game Boy games on the TV because I love them so much. And he was like, all right. and just like, I don't know, just saw me with like, you know, these big eyes being like, please, sir. And my mom being like, come on, he's saved up for months or whatever. Yeah, and I brought it home. I remember plugging it in and playing my Game Boy games on there, and it just blew my mind. And I bought all the games that had like this little Super Game Boy logo on the cart, which meant that they had their own sort of unique 16-bit border. And I bought a bunch of games that I didn't even want, just because I was like, it's so cool that, you know, these 8-bit games are suddenly 16-bit. So yeah, it's one of those things. It's one of my favorite systems of all time. I realize I own 2 Game Boy shaped carrying cases that are basically bigger Game Boys. Like I have one for the original Game Boy, which is this huge Game Boy shaped Game Boy case that fits, you know, the regular size Game Boy in it, and then I have another one for 3DS that fits a 3DS XL, and it's so stupid.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
It makes no sense at all. They're all bad cases, but they're very cute.
It's like if you had a guitar case to carry a flute or something. Like it's just it's dumb.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I know you love the original Game Boy.
Yeah.
And the 3DS, obviously. What's your favorite stuff in between?
So I loved the I think one of my favorite systems ever made is the Game Boy Advance SP, specifically the NES one, because it looked like a little NES and it folded. And like one of the issues with the original Game Boy Advance was it wasn't backlit, and you know, it was light and portable and stuff like that, but it was really hard to see the games, and it would get scratched up in your pocket. And the DS, the 3DS, the Game Boy Advance SP all had this like clamshell design, which, you know, Sony never really did anything with. They did like the PSP Go, which had that screen that popped out of the bottom, which was more of like sort of evocative of like the cell phone stuff that they were doing at the time, or a lot of companies were doing.
Clamshell. There needs to be more clamshell stuff in general.
I agree.
Like the DS that was just like it would just seal up just along the side, you know, it was like a perfect compact. The old MacBooks that were just like and just stay shut, you know, like anything like that. I love it. I literally took a Game Boy SP to prom. I was like just obsessed with. My friend. It was like at that point where like my friend was like over his, or he got a PSP or something, and he's like, "Do you want to borrow it?" I was like, "Hell yeah, I want to borrow this." And I just played the shit out of like Minish Cap, and I was literally like on the cloud dungeon of Minish Cap on prom night, and I'm just like sitting at this table in this fucking white dinner jacket.
We could do a whole episode on the GBA, but it was the SP specifically was one of the best systems to hide and play. Basically, like you could fold the screen up so it was up against the desk at school, and then your hands were underneath. Whereas like the regular GBA or the Game Boy Color was a big unit you had to hold, right? People could see it. But the SP, you could pop the screen up on one side and have everything else underneath, and just have it kind of 45-degree angled, and just play video games like that, which I did for countless hours. So much of the Game Boy library really holds up. So like if you haven't played those games, you know, go look up lists of the best Game Boy games, hidden gems or whatever.
There's definitely like they have differing degrees of like the thin upper crust or whatever, because there's like the best, like the top 25 Game Boy Advance games are incredible, and the top 35 okay, and then you get to like anything deeper than that, and it just gets into Shit City, and it's just, and Shit City was a pretty good shmup, but like honestly, it was
not on
like,
the Game Boy though.
Yeah,
bad port.
Shit City 3 on the PSP.
It was more
better.
of a poop town on the Game Boy. They really took a lot of I bought a game called The Getaway on Game Boy, which was a pinball game that occasionally jumped into like racing sequences.
What?
Yeah, it was like an arcade racer, and I didn't know this was a thing ever, but I saw a copy of it for sale at the mall, from the old mall in Mallrats, where the three-nippled fortune teller takes her rubber nipple off. So we went to that mall when we were kids, and I don't think I put 2 and 2 together until the movie came out. But we went there, and I bought a bunch of like used action figures, and they had a boxed copy of this game, The Getaway, just on a shelf in an otherwise like pretty boring. It was kind of like an antique mall. Like it's not really like a.
I love the antique stores that just have like a weird pocket of toys somewhere.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And I was like, oh my god, they have a Game Boy game here. And it's like $20, and I was like, Mom, can I get it? And she's like, yeah, sure, whatever. And yeah, I loved this. I played this game endlessly growing up. It was like pinball and racing. Really, really clever. It's called The Getaway. The music's really catchy. But yeah, there's a ton of great games on the Game Boy. One of my favorite systems of all time. One of the coolest designs. It's basically invented handheld gaming as we know it, which persists to the Switch 2, which is launching this year. So yeah, The Game Boy rules.
Yeah.
I love this system, and I always will.
We got a few sort of listener comments about this. I'm gonna fire these
let's
out
hear
real
'em.
quick. So Cozy, who's kind of our community manager,
up, Cozy?
posted on Blue Sky, said, I borrowed a Game Boy and a copy of Pokemon Red from a friend when I was young. While I never rolled credits in Red at the time, I did, with a little help from the internet, successfully perform the Mew glitch, in which you perform a series of arcane tasks that allow you to encounter Mew, the legendary Pokemon, in the game under glitchy circumstances. I felt like I had hacked the planet, trademark, when I managed to pull it off. I also messed around with Missing No, which is the mysterious cryptid Pokemon, a whole lot, and probably irreversibly corrupted my Pokemon party in the process. That was the fact that you could like break Pokemon that and then they knew you were doing it too. That there were just glitchy things in there. There was like weird haunted. There's like ghosts in there. That's for such a small game, there's so much stuff in there. There's much weird stuff.
There's so much history and lore that came from it, and like Missing No becoming like a whole. Missing No was a meme before like we knew what those things were, right?
Totally.
And Mew was like one of those things where you heard it on playgrounds or you heard it at school, and it seemed like a lie because so much at the time was like you got your information from gaming magazines. We didn't, websites were totally rudimentary. We didn't like IGN was barely a thing. And so like any news you got was from a kid at school who said his uncle worked for Nintendo. So, unreliable narrators basically. And so, yeah, hearing about characters like Mew, you're like, no way. Like I remember somebody was like, oh, in, Final Fantasy 2 on Super Nintendo, you can jump on the bar and somebody will go in the back room and then you can play. All the women in the game are naked from then on. I was like, whoa, really? And
yeah,
then
the difference with a weird thing in a Game Boy is like somebody would whip it out of their bag and be like, check it out, I caught Mew. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
You've got this.
Awesome.
You found out who killed Kennedy? What? No, Christopher Miller on Blue Sky said, using that link cable to trade Pokemon in battle blew my mind. Unfortunately, only one of the friends in my circle had a cable, so the rest of us were always bummed when he wasn't available. Did the Game Boy really come with a link cable?
So the original one did, but I don't remember if the Game Boy Pocket did.
I don't think it did.
Yeah, it makes me feel like it was sold separately.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. Like, I feel like, and I
which
imagine,
is so funny because that's it is it's right there with Pokemon, which is the link cable game.
Yeah, okay, so what's hella stupid is the Game Boy Color had the little infrared thing in it,
right?
But that wasn't compatible with Pokemon Red and Blue. I don't think you couldn't trade that way. I don't think so. I want to say like maybe Gold and Silver introduced it.
Yes,
but so there's all these kids like bashing their like little atomic purple things together, being like, "What? Why isn't it working?"
That was so funny.
I remember, they would sell the Game Link cable. I just remember seeing like that was suddenly a thing that was in demand. This felt like a weird precursor to like, important adapters you need jumping between console generations. But the fact that was a pack-in with the original, and then by the time Pokemon rolled around, anybody who was an early adopter had either moved on to other things or lost the cable.
What's interesting is I bought a game for Game Boy called F1 Race. Do you know about this game?
Yes.
And so that came with the 4-player adapter, which was like incredibly short-lived. I think only like 5 games supported it, and then Nintendo just kind of quietly killed it off. But like again, ships in the night, right? Like that would have been perfect for like 4 people trading Pokemon at the same time, all gather around some like weird tentacle hub.
Well, it's like crazy how like that, fast forward 30 years and now it's like, the Switch too, if someone's sitting next to you, they can play all your games.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome.
We also got, let's see, over on Twitter, let's see, Kadosha said the Game Boy was an awesome handheld plus a fun library of titles to choose from. My favorite games: Metroid 2, Legends of Zelda: Link's Awakening, Oracle of Ages and Seasons, worth calling out because that was Capcom doing their thing. Like, the rare occasions where like a third party got to do Nintendo games and they were awesome.
One of the few successful attempts at basically doing what Pokemon did, which was like you got to buy 2 of these things, right? Like they made Bomberman games that were just like multiple different colors, and people were like, I get what you're doing, but it doesn't really work. But Oracle of Ages and Seasons were each unique games that if you completed, it would give you a password to enter into the other one, and like beating them both created this like amazing reward.
That's
again,
so cool.
Those are on Switch Online, so if you want to play those are great. Like Game Boy is where Kirby got started too. Like that was It's like, Sakurai went on to create Smash Brothers, which like every time you see like a trailer for a Smash Brothers thing, like Kirby is sort of like canonically the strongest character in the game. He's sort of like the main character of Smash Brothers, which is interesting. Like he's all front and center in the cutscenes. It's not really like Mario's game as much as it is like Kirby's whole thing.
Well, the thing I love about that is you look at Kirby's design, and Kirby is so rudimentary because of necessity. Because the Game Boy can't register a certain amount of stuff. And that's also true of Pokemon, where there's probably a reason that a bunch of the first generation of Pokemon kind of just look like Kirby, because they had to be identifiable as little tiny sprites. You have to be able to tell what they are on a screen. And so like they had some interesting challenges there to make 151 unique animals that could be seen on the screen. And like, you know, as the generations progress, they get sort of muddy design wise, because they're suddenly like, yeah, we got some polygons to play with. Like this is on a 720p screen. Like suddenly it's a non-issue. But like back then, yeah, you had limited real estate to you know, convey information. So
what I love about that specifically too is like Kirby on the box art for Game Boy is black and white, because he's black and white in the game, because they wouldn't be like, that lovable pink puff is here, and then start the game and you're like, no, he's not. Like, so man. Yeah, I mean, I think that they like always intended for him to be pink, but he's just not in the game and he's not on the cover, so it's very funny.
My version of your Super Game Boy story was when I got like Nintendo ROMs on my PC in like 2000 or whatever, I would go in and do custom color. Like I would just like do manual palette swaps, and I'm like, this isn't Kirby, this is Kirby's evil toxic waste cousin Slurby, and it's like neon green Kirby, and I was like, what am I doing?
The edgelord ROM hacks at the time, where they're just like, it's wheelchair Mario, like
nude Punch Out,
pregnant Metroid. so stupid.
It's Mario but with Optimus Prime. Why? I don't know.
That was happening at the same time, where you would like go on Kazaa and it would be like Eminem featuring Cartman, Dr. Dre, Dr. Doolittle, and you're like, this is not a real song, and you download it and it would
Weird
just
Al
be porn.
Yankovic, Super Mario Brothers Rap.wav. Well, that's a story for another day. I will say one thing about the Game Boy that I think is fascinating. The original Game Boy, most things when you look back at them or you revisit them from your childhood, you're like, wow, it's so much smaller than I remember. The original Game Boy is so much bigger than I remember.
It is a big thing, and like especially like as a kid, this thing felt gigantic, and even as an adult, I'm like, man, that is huge.
But no, I mean that's exactly it. As a kid, you got used to it, and what are you comparing it to? But then, I don't know, you fast forward a few generations and you go to like a Game Boy Pocket and Game Boy Color, Game Boy Micro. They get increasingly small, and then suddenly you're carrying around a phone that's like if you boiled down a Game Boy removed all pockets of air and made it entirely screen, and you're like used to that, and so you suddenly hold this thing that literally survived Desert Storm. Like there's that infamous one that got blown to shit, and like.
Yeah, it was at the Nintendo World Store for a while.
How hard can your brother kick, by the way? Because like, there was that that one like survived like a cruise missile attack or something, and it's like still plays Tetris.
Like he was really into soccer at the time, I guess. It's
spinning bird kick.
You and me, you and I saw that Game Boy in person together at the Nintendo World Store, right? Like they got rid of it, but the one in New York City, they had it on display for like the longest time there, and it was just this blown. It was like melted and corroded and also like sort of expanded, but it had survived the bombing.
Still works.
Just running Tetris, and I think like after a while they were probably like, I don't know, this is like a good thing to brag about. It's just like, because immediately your brain goes like, but people didn't survive that bombing, and they're like, but Tetris did. This boy did. And you're like, well, all right.
Well, Game Boy rules.
The Game Boy rules. I love it. Go play those games. They're great.
And now it's the part of the show where I thank our extra special Patreon producers, Chip Chunkling, Scott Davis, Ben Burkhalter, Paul Atienza, Kevin Lemasurier, Steve Cam, Caleb Hilliard, and Billy McKendry. Thanks a bunch, fellas.
They said it wasn't humanly possible. All the power and excitement of Nintendo right in the palm of your hand. Introducing Game Boy. It's portable, it's in stereo, and its games are interchangeable. Game Boy comes complete with batteries and the outrageous new game Tetris. And for head-to-head competition, use Video Link and blow your opponent away. Game Boy, only from Nintendo. Now you're playing with power, portable power.